Just Once with Aunt Sophie is the 22nd episode of the third season of Two and a Half Men. This is directed by Aronsohn, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode, but I don't actually have a tremendous amount to say. It's definitely not my favourite episode. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing in it that I didn't like, but I didn't find it to be very funny. And honestly, there are a lot of scenes where Charlie and Alan are talking and the conversations just seem to go on forever and they weren't that interesting. But the scenes with Jake, I rather did like. So I will go through things and point out some things that I liked. But in general, while I wouldn't skip the episode, if I were binge watching this season, I definitely would never choose it. It starts off with Jake playing a console game. Alan's trying to talk to him, and this exchange I actually loved because Alan asks Jake what he's been doing at school, and he tells him nothing. And Alan says, "You just sit there all day and stare at the wall." Jake's response, "That's where the clock is." And then Alan replies, "I find it hard to believe that you just watch the clock all day." Jake's response, "Have you seen my report card?" I loved it. Very well written, brilliant exchange. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Jake then gets a phone call. It's from a girl called Wendy Cho, and he basically sprints to the phone. And clearly he likes Wendy Cho, and he is invited to her party. And this is the first time Jake has gone to a boy-girl party. And we then have an okay-ish scene. We're in the car, and then we're shopping for new clothes, and then Jake is getting a haircut. And it's absolutely fine. Jake was interesting, but honestly, Charlie and Alan, I just didn't really find them to be that interesting in this episode. Then Jake's getting ready for the party, and I have to say, he looks pretty cool. He looks really good. And they drive him there, and he goes in on his own. And while they're waiting for them to get a phone call from Jake saying he's ready to be picked up, they go to a diner. I thought that was a good idea. It gave us a change of location. It was a nice change of pace. I liked the environment. I think that was definitely a good decision. What happened in the scene wasn't interesting. Charlie was basically worrying it was too much for Jake too soon, and then he got the waitress's phone number. It's fine. It was a bit predictable, but it wasn't that interesting. But I do like the fact that we had a different environment. And then they're back in the car to pick up Jake, and we had an interesting enough moment with Alan, because Alan said he was actually feeling a little bit jealous, and I thought he meant he was jealous of Charlie, because Jake had been turning to Charlie for advice. But he was actually jealous of Jake, because he wished Charlie had taken him under his wing the way he was doing with Jake when Alan was younger, but as we know, that definitely didn't happen, and I actually found that to be quite sweet. I'm not necessarily saying Alan's life would have been different if Charlie had taken him under his wing, but maybe things might have turned out differently for him. So that moment I quite liked. It lasted about a minute, but I thought it was pretty decent. Jake then comes in the car, and Charlie tells him he has lipstick on his face, which he doesn't. But it was a trick to get Jake to admit that he kissed Wendy Cho, and honestly, Jake was kind of cool about it. He didn't make a big deal out of it, I think because he was quite proud of himself. So it was quite sweet, and then we end with Charlie and Alan on the deck, and it's not the most interesting episode. Everything with Jake, I definitely think was interesting, but the bulk of the episode is just Alan and Charlie talking with each other, and that's not necessarily a bad thing on its own. There are plenty of episodes where they have either really meaningful conversations or really funny conversations, but I just thought it was flat. Definitely not that interesting. As I said, it's not bad. It's not badly written. It's not unbelievable or anything. I believe the characters' actions, the conversations made sense within the context of the narrative. It just wasn't that interesting. So I wouldn't say it's a bad episode. As I said, I wouldn't skip it if I were binge watching this season, but I didn't think it was very funny. I didn't think it was very fun. Ultimately, while I didn't hate it, I didn't really enjoy Just Once with Aunt Sophie either. It's not the best episode, but I guess it's also not the worst.